Greetings, Goblins. Today's video is the 4 essential things you need to run D&D, but if you're an old grognard, don't click away because I snuck in some super tiny important tips for you too. Now, if this video looks familiar, it's because it came out last week, but it was already dead in the water after 3 days because I didn't use a super clickbaity title like this, but for science, I thought I'd try to resuscitate this video because I believe in it. If you were one of the 58 dedicated viewers who found this video through your subscription feed, then thank you. But if not, make sure you click that bell icon and hit all so that you see every video I put out and not just these clickbaity ones. Thanks. Now enjoy the video. Hey folks, and welcome to Play the Damn Game. In today's video, I want to talk about some of the do's and don'ts of getting started with your first campaign or D&D style game, and the 4 crucial things you need to get started in any D&D campaign. First off, I would like to start things out with giving ourselves permission to have a sort of palate cleanse from all the online advice and examples in the D&D Dungeon Tuber sphere. There is some really great stuff out there, and I don't want to discount any of that. I think it's easy with so much great advice and so many good examples of games like D&D that we start to put all this pressure on ourselves, on our prep, and I think we worry so much about the fun at our tables that we forget to have it ourselves. And it can actually cause us to have burnout or to never endeavor to play games in the first place. These are, after all, leisure activities of escapism. They exist so that we can forget about the worries of life for a few hours and enjoy the company of our friends at the table and the stories that we tell together. So let's give ourselves permission to do exactly that. Okay, now that we've gotten that primer out of the way and I've told you to forget about all the advice online, here's some advice. If you're brand new to the hobby, it's easy to get sucked into this idea that you need all these things, all these toys, assets, books, and I'm here to tell you that you don't. The way I see it, there are actually only 4 things crucial that you need in order to run a game of D&D. Number 1 is pretty self-explanatory. You're going to need a system, but there's a caveat here. Don't hear me say, go out and buy a bunch of books. That's not the message. Because here's one of the greatest things about this hobby is that every game you want to run, including the big 2, has a version online that should be free or at least very cheap. And that Quickstart guide will have everything you need in order to start running the game. Now I'm very aware that in our culture, and especially as nerdy collectors, that there's this temptation to go out and buy every game that we think we want to run. And yes, I'm one of the worst offenders of this, but I want to say before you do, go check out the Quickstart guides to these games, because literally every game I can think of has some kind of Quickstart guide. It just sometimes takes a little bit of digging. And I urge you to try the Quickstart versions of these games before you go out and buy, and I'm going to give you 2 reasons why. Number A is that the data shows that most campaigns in games really only make it to about level 5. And for a lot of these games, the Quickstart guide is going to take you at least that far. And if you and your group are really enjoying that game, there's going to be plenty of time to go ahead and order some of those books or go to your FLGS before you reach that max level of the Quickstart guide. So I may have just saved you on average about $60 to $100. Which brings me to point number B. Only using the Quickstart guide, you may discover that the game doesn't quite scratch the itch that you and your players are looking for, and now there's 0 sunken cost fallacy to grapple with. And now you, and more importantly your 3 to 5 other players, have not gone out of their way to grab the player's guide, the advanced player's guide, and all the other supplemental books that you thought you needed to start playing. Instead, if it isn't clicking, try out a few more of these Quickstart guides, play them for a few sessions, get a feel for different systems, and find the game that works for your group. And guess what? They're usually the most concise versions of the rules, so you won't get weighted down in all the extraneous bloat of all the explanations and things, and there's going to be a lot of tie over in between the different systems, because mechanically, they usually end up being pretty similar. Oh, and it's worth mentioning that lots of these Quickstart guides actually include great adventures as well, especially if it's something like a DCC, and a lot of times these are good ways to get into the games that you're trying, but more on that later. As I said at the start of this video, I think there are 4 crucial things that you actually need to get started playing games like D&D, and number 2 I think is one of the most crucial, and that's friends. Now, I know, we're all nerds here, and this can be one of the hardest things to grapple with, but I think that one of the most crucial aspects of playing a great game of D&D is having the right group. Now, I get it. Everyone's busy, we all have our excuses, and it's hard to get folks to commit to a new idea that may be seemingly intimidating, but I think the key here is to start small. So break out your phone, brush up on your T9 skills, and get that group text going. Tell those friends you're looking to just play a game for a few hours and you'd love to have them there. Let them know it's something you really enjoy. Maybe you have a natural excuse to gather, like your birthday's coming up or a holiday, or you can just tell them that you're missing all their faces and you'd love to get together and have a fun night of games. Obviously, this doesn't have to be a group of friends that you're close with. In fact, some of my close friends I have met through the opportunity of gaming. So invite folks who have similar interests to you and get the dice rolling. But one of the important things is try to not start out making it a huge commitment. Try to start with a one-shot, something that takes maybe 2 or 3 hours. And I highly recommend starting with pre-gens so you don't spend the first hour staring at textbooks and you can get the dice rolling before they get intimidated or decide to leave. Put them as close to the action as possible, and I really mean it when I say try to keep that adventure under 3 hours so you don't have people checking out and looking at their Facebooks on their phones. I've introduced D&D to plenty of people who weren't gamers, and let me tell you, almost no one had a bad time, even if they ended up saying it's not their bag in the end. They aren't going to forget that experience, and as long as you don't spend half the time arguing rules, I think they're going to walk away enjoying a new activity. Okay, number 3. I've mentioned this a few times already, but you're going to want to start off with an adventure in mind, and I recommend making it a short one-shot, emphasis on short. I personally think that starting off with a 300-page adventure is just a bad idea. At the least, you're probably going to disappoint yourself when it falls apart, and for most adult groups, it's just not practical these days. Back in the day, a lot of adventures looked more like this than this, and I personally think this should be the standard again. First off, shorter adventures have clear end goals, and you can always spin off that adventure or narrative into a greater arc with or without the same players at natural breaking points. But also, if this is your first time ever running for this group of people, it's generally a better idea to start off small because you don't necessarily know where this game is going to lead, what players are going to stick with you, and there are just so many free adventures online for just about any system you can imagine in places like itch.io, or if you're running games like DCC and ShadowDark, they're very, very cheap and oftentimes free. There's a lot of sirens coming this way. They found me. I don't know how, but they found me. Okay, anyway. Plus, I am going to make the assumption that this is for a new group, and you'd rather get started sooner than later. Get one of these small adventures, run it first, because it will teach you so much about the game, the Quickstart system you've just picked up, and you're going to learn some lessons about the culture and style of play from that adventure. Now, I'm generally a creative person, and I prefer to come up with my own adventures and ideas, but I highly, highly, highly recommend running a published adventure first and getting a feel for a new system. Other than that, put a date on the calendar about 2 weeks out and stick to it. That's 1 week to learn the Quickstart Guide and 1 week to learn that adventure. Otherwise, you're going to listen to too much advice from talking heads like me and end up thinking of an excuse not to run the game. Because it is in the running of the game, the doing of the thing that will make you better at it, and that is something that cannot be taught through a YouTube video. All right, so that brings us to number 4. Last and actually least, kind of in this order, are the gizmos and doodads you need to run your specific game at the table. And they're pretty universal for most of these D&D style games. Paper, pencil, notepads, character sheet, dice, that sort of stuff. And one of my top recommendations if you're going to play a tactical grid style sort of game is one of these dry erase Pathfinder mats from Paizo. Along with a few Expo markers. The markers were about $10, and I think the mat was about 15 to 20, though it's been years, and I've gotten a hell of a lot of use out of this thing. Now, personally, I would pick this up over the Chessex style mat because I like that it fits nicely into my backpack, and it doesn't weigh anything, so it's not going to weigh me down at a con when I have a bunch of other books I'm bringing with me. Now, you don't have to have one of these style mats for most games. You can always use Theater of the Mind, but I like to have them for more visually grounded players and because I like drawing maps. But do be warned, because they rub off easily and then you end up with blue fingers. And I think to no one's surprise, the next thing I'm going to recommend is dice. Of course, if you want to start off cheaper, there are always apps and online methods of rolling dice, but I highly recommend the ancient pastime of rolling bones. Now, if you're going to put money down for anything at the start of this hobby, my recommendation would be clear, legible dice. Now, there are tons and tons of dice out there, and ways to get them cheap, or ways to get them in bundles if you just want to have a bunch of dice at the table for your players to use, and that's fine. But I'm going to make kind of a different case here. I was once a dice goblin, and I want to keep you from making the same mistakes I did. When I started out in this hobby, I bought lots of little dice, and I think I spent too much money on a bunch of little sets that I no longer use for various reasons. I've definitely got something neurological going on, whether it's ADHD, dyslexia, dyscalculia, or some combo. My brain does not do well with all the inclusions, weird multicolored dice, and all the fancy nonsense that an entire industry has risen up around. Oh, and pips. Yeah, the pips on dice just don't work for me. No strange characters or symbols, just good old Arabic numbers. So, there are two sets of dice that have risen to the top and beaten all the rest in my mind, and I'll tell you why. Contrast and readability. These are my two sets, one from Runehammer and the other from Mono Makes. Both of these dice sets have a nice heft to them, and they feel substantial. But I can also clearly read the numbers when I roll them, and so can my players. Not only that, but the Mono Makes dice have a different color for the top number on each die, which sends a signal to my brain that something extra special happens when that color comes up. And it's exciting for me and my players. I roll in the open, I let the dice fall where they may, and I read them even with my aging eyes. Now, I won't lie, both of these dice sets are quite premium, and I'm not going to say for your first set of dice, go out and buy the nicest ones on the market, but don't do what I do, and instead of buying a bunch of little sets that you end up not using, just save up money each time you would have bought some other inferior set, and it won't be long before you'll be showing off these superior quality dice and be the envy of your entire table. Now, I've used a lot of dice over the years, and I'm not being paid by either of these folks to say anything about their dice. They're just my favorites, and if there's one thing I can't stand, it's when somebody rolls a die and immediately grabs it off the table and picks it up to look at the number because they can't read it. Readability and contrast are the two most important qualifiers in a set of dice for me. Anyway, I'll put links to all the material things down in the description below, as well as some places to get some free RPGs and adventures. Alright folks, well, that's the video. I just wanted to get started with something really basic. This might be obvious to a lot of you, but there are folks out there just looking for a good place to start off, and I want to give them the best advice possible, which is Quickstart Guides and short adventures. Don't get too caught up in your own head. Don't get too caught up with all the advice online. As Theodore Roosevelt once said, comparison is the thief of joy. So, hope you've enjoyed this, and as always, remember, learn, adapt, and grow.